Episode 1. You're not coming back weaker. You're coming back wiser. There's something sacred about the way you return. Not rushed, not loud, not seeking vengeance, but carrying vision. They'll see you and think, she's back. But they won't recognize what's different now, because this version of you didn't come back for validation. You came back with wisdom. You didn't return to prove a point. You are the point. You didn't return to show them who you become. You returned to become who you no longer need to explain. The spaces that once confined you now feel small, not because you've outgrown them, but because you now understand them. You see the patterns. You sense the fear. You feel the energy of everything that once made you shrink. And this time, you don't bend. You're not here to fight for a seat. You carry the table now. You walk in with clarity, not resentment, with grace, not games. And it shakes the ground, because true transformation doesn't shout. It shifts the air. You were gone for a reason, not to escape, but to evolve. You left broken, but you returned built from prayers no one heard, battles no one saw, faith no one measured. They'll think you came back to relive the past, but the truth is, you returned to reclaim your voice and release what was always yours. You're not triggered this time. You're trained. You're not walking on eggshells. You're walking in evidence. You're not wondering if you belong. You're wondering who else needs to be freed. Because when you come back wiser, you don't seek revenge. You carry revelation. You no longer look for apologies. You offer alignment. And where once your presence felt fragile, now it feels foundational. Not because you've hardened, but because you've been humbled into unshakable truth. This isn't a comeback. It's a commission. You were sent back, not to fit in, but to open eyes, to awaken rooms, to light fires, where fear once settled like dust. So when they ask, why did you come back? You'll smile and say, because I don't run from roots. I restore them. Because healing isn't always walking away. Sometimes it's returning whole. You're not coming back weaker. You're coming back wiser. And everything about you now whispers, this time, I see it all, and I choose love with boundaries, truth with silence, power with peace. Episode 2, they thought you were gone, but heaven was just hiding you. You disappeared. At least, that's how it looked. You went silent. You stopped showing up in rooms. That drained your light. You withdrew from conversations that no longer carried truth, and they assumed the worst. She gave up. She lost her fire. She couldn't keep up. But what they didn't know was that you weren't being erased. You were being hidden by heaven on purpose for something holy. You weren't absent. You were under assignment. You weren't lost. You were being located by the Spirit who knew exactly where to take you. When the crowd forgot, the disappearance wasn't weakness. It was warfare. The silence wasn't apathy. It was sacred strategy. The invisibility wasn't failure. It was a veil placed by divine hands until your spirit could carry the weight of what comes next, because what was on you was too sacred for public exposure before it was fully formed. Heaven doesn't rush when it intends to rain. You were hidden so you wouldn't be handled by hands that weren't ready. You were hidden so your oil could mature in stillness before it was poured out with purpose. And now the veil is lifting, the silence is breaking, and the ones who assumed you faded will soon witness what heaven was protecting. You didn't miss your moment. You were being measured for something eternal. And now that you're stepping back in, you're not coming with noise. You're coming with weight, not to be seen, to shake, not to be noticed, to name, not to relive the old story, to release a new one. You weren't gone. You were growing. You weren't buried. You were becoming. You weren't missing. You were marked. They thought you were finished. But heaven was fortifying you. They thought you were done. But God was discerning the timing. They thought you were irrelevant. But oil doesn't evaporate. It deepens. So walk back in, not with explanation, but with evidence, not with noise, but with knowing, not with a need to be heard, but with a voice that shifts rooms, just by speaking the truth. You weren't absent. You were undercover. And now that heaven has unveiled you, no one can deny what disappeared has returned different. Because you weren't gone. You were hidden until the glory was ready. And now it's ready. Episode 3. You didn't come back to blend in. You came back to break patterns. They hoped you'd return. Quiet, safe, palatable, shrunken down enough to fit where you used to fold. But you didn't come back to disappear again. You came back to disrupt, not with chaos, but with clarity, not with rage, but with righteous rhythm, not with rebellion, but with reformation. You didn't come back to make peace with what poisoned you. You came back to name it, break it, and leave no room for the next generation to inherit the same chains. You are not here to keep tradition. You are here to test it. You are not here to honor silence. You are here to unmute legacy. You are not here to keep the peace built on suppression. You are here to bring truth and let it wreck what was never real. Because you saw it, didn't you? The cycles, the unspoken rules, the pain passed down like an heirloom and labeled normal. You felt it in your body. The tension when you tried to breathe freely in a room built to keep you pleasing. And now you refuse to play the part. You came back, not to play small, but to play trumpet, to sound the alarm that says, this ends with me. It doesn't go further. Not on my watch. Not with my voice asleep. You didn't return to blend in. You returned to be the interruption, the pattern breaker, the cycle cutter, the one whose clarity calls every unhealed system to stand at attention. And yes, they'll feel it. They'll flinch at your honesty. They'll mislabel your boldness. They'll call your disruption rebellion. But you know, this isn't rebellion. It's redemption. Redemption of bloodlines. Redemption of memory. Redemption of what was stolen. In rooms that called silence strength. You are not loud. You are liberating. You are not dramatic. You are divinely disruptive. You are not too much. You are exactly enough to shake what needs to fall and speak what needs to rise. You came back, not to be tolerated. You came back to be timed perfectly into a moment where truth needed a body, and you said yes. So no, you won't fit in. You weren't meant to. You're not a puzzle piece. You're the earthquake. And when you speak, patterns tremble, not because you're trying to break them, but because they were never meant to survive your light. You didn't come back to blend in. You came back to break through. And the atmosphere knows it. Episode 4. You carry the answer they didn't know they were praying for. You walk in, and the room shifts, not because you demand it, but because the atmosphere recognizes what you carry. You're not louder than anyone. You're not trying to be noticed, but something about you says, hope lives here. And healing just walked in. They won't always know how to name it. Some won't even realize they were waiting for it. But deep in their spirit, they'll feel it. You are the answer. They didn't know. They were praying for. Not a savior. Not a fixer. Not a hero. A reminder. A signal. A confirmation. That heaven heard what their mouth couldn't say out loud. You didn't show up to preach. You showed up to embody. You carry presence. Not performance. And your presence breaks silence, breaks cycles, breaks the despair. That's been trying to pass as normal. You are the sound beneath their numbness. You are the warmth in the space where faith went cold. You're the first time in a long time someone felt seen without having to explain their pain. This isn't about charisma. This is about commission. You were sent, not by people, by purpose. And the evidence isn't in what you say. It's in how their eyes water. When you simply stay in the room, you carry the kind of peace that interrupts panic, the kind of truth that doesn't shame. It shakes loose what was never supposed to stay hidden. You don't have to explain why you're here. Your timing is the answer. Your softness is the answer. Your story is the answer. Because their prayers didn't need a solution. They needed a signal that they weren't forgotten. And you are that signal. Not because you tried, but because you survived. Because you said yes to becoming something holy. Through everything unholy that happened to you. You're not forcing anything. You're fulfilling something. You're not the answer to every question, but you are the evidence that God still sends people when the silence feels too long. So when you feel that tug, that moment when a room pauses, when someone leans in, when the air gets still, know this, you just became the response to someone else's whisper. You carry the answer they didn't know they were praying for, and your presence is making space for miracles to breathe again. Episode 5. Your presence doesn't fill the room. It rebuilds it. You walk in, and something begins to shift. Not just attention, not just conversation. The structure of the room changes. Not because you speak, but because your silence carries order. You weren't made to be background. You were born to be blueprint. When you enter space, walls remember they were never meant to trap anyone. When you breathe, the air softens, like it, too, had been waiting for someone to bring truth back into the architecture. You don't just fill a room. You rebuild it. You bring alignment. You bring atmosphere. You bring the kind of energy that lays new foundations. Where trauma once dictated the design, your presence is not decoration. It's direction. You carry what many fear, clarity. And clarity doesn't just rearrange chairs. It removes tables that were never meant to stand. It tears down ceilings made of shame. It widens doorways that were built too small for real joy to walk through. You don't just comfort, you confront with grace. You don't just glow, you gather what's been scattered. You don't just speak truth, you reveal where the lies used to live. And the room, it remembers the last time someone stood here with peace that didn't flinch. It remembers how long it's been since someone walked in and didn't absorb the chaos, but cleared it. You don't heal people by fixing them. You heal the space so they feel safe enough to face themselves. You don't change the story. You change the soundtrack underneath it until the shame fades and a new voice rises. You're not a guest. You're a gate, a portal, a passage, a holy interruption to what thought it could stay standing forever. You don't just bring peace. You plant it, and where peace is planted, walls fall, windows open, and God builds again. So stop wondering if your presence matters. It doesn't just matter. It makes room. It makes new memory, new structure, new sanctuary. Because your presence was never meant to decorate the room. It was meant to rebuild it from the inside out, brick by brick, breath by breath. Episode 6. You didn't just return with fire. You returned with framework. Yes, you carry fire. It's in your words, your walk, your worship. But what's shaking rooms now is not just your heat. It's your structure. You didn't just return with power. You return with pattern. A new one, a divine one, a blueprint that makes broken things. Reconsider how they were built, because in the hidden place, you weren't just healing, you were learning. You were being handed strategies. That didn't come from books. They came from burden, from battles, from the stillness, where heaven carved wisdom into your ribcage. So now you speak, and it's not just passion, it's principle. You move, and it's not just momentum, it's method. You show up, and systems start to shake, not because you're loud, but because your presence carries a plan. You don't just ignite, you instruct. You don't just inspire, you implement. You don't just burn, you build, and it's unsettling, because fire is easy to admire, until it becomes a foundation, until it confronts the chaos that used to call itself normal. You're not here to entertain the room. You're here to establish order, to remind the atmosphere that holy things don't just fall, They are formed. And you were formed in the silence. So that what you bring now could hold weight. You're not just a torchbearer. You are a temple builder. The wisdom you carry isn't reaction. It's revelation. It wasn't crafted in conference halls. It was whispered in caves, delivered through tears, confirmed by fire. So when you walk in, you don't come to mirror what's there. You come to map what's next. You don't copy. You consecrate. You don't decorate. You design. They thought you'd return wild. You returned wise. They thought you'd bring noise. You brought navigation. They expected fire, but they didn't expect framework. You don't just tear down. You show the new way. You don't just prophesy. You prepare the place for prophecy to land and last. So don't underestimate what you're carrying. This isn't hype. It's holy infrastructure. This isn't energy. It's engineering. And the Spirit didn't send you back to impress the room, but to reconstruct it. You didn't just return with fire. You returned with framework. And now, heaven is ready to build. Episode 7. You're not trying to change things. You are the change they were afraid of. You don't need to fight for impact. Your existence is the impact. You're not campaigning to be a disruptor. You are the disruption, not because you tried, but because you refuse to die where the system said you were supposed to. They feel it before you speak. They sense it when you enter the room. That pull, that shift, that subtle unraveling of everything they kept neat and numb. You don't have to name it, but you carry it. Change, not just as an idea, but as a presence. You walk in, and the false structure starts to crack. Not because you're angry, but because you're real. They wanted polite revival. You brought truth. They expected managed emotion. You carried heavenly interruption. They prayed for transformation, but didn't know it would show up in your body. You are not trying to shake things up. You are the shaking. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be authentic, and authenticity has always been the greatest threat to systems built on pretending. You didn't come back to prove your worth. You came back as proof that what they tried to bury has resurrected with authority. They were afraid of this, not because you're dangerous, but because you're uncontrollable, because you no longer need permission to speak, because your presence now exposes what their silence protected. You are not a troublemaker. You are a timeline breaker. You are not here to cause chaos. You are here to call time on everything that's been hiding behind religion, behind protocol, behind fear that wears a suit. And yes, they'll resist you. They'll try to label you, contain you, tame you. But what they don't understand is that you've already been through the fire, and you didn't come out looking for approval. You came out anointed. You're not leading a movement. You are the movement that no one saw coming. Not funded, not framed, just faithful. And when they ask, why are things falling apart since you returned? Heaven will whisper, because she carried the thing we've been trying to build for generations. You are not trying to change things. You are the change. They didn't know how to survive, but desperately needed. And now they have no choice but to choose, pretend, or transform. Episode 8. You didn't come back for power. You came back for alignment. They thought you wanted control, that your return was a quiet campaign for influence. But what they didn't understand is that your heart stopped craving power the moment it started craving truth. You didn't come back to lead people. You came back to lead everything back to alignment, not just position, not titles, not image, but soul deep clarity, heart deep healing, heaven deep order. You didn't come to rearrange the stage. You came to recalibrate the ground, to shift the foundation until what's out of rhythm can't keep pretending it's whole. You've touched power before, and it didn't satisfy. You've seen platforms, and they didn't sustain you. What you long for now is rightness, not in appearance. In essence, you came back, not to lead from above, but to stand in the center and feel where the bones have gone dislocated, to sense the fracture, to call it back, with the voice of one who no longer needs to shout. Alignment isn't flashy. It's holy. It doesn't impress the room. It heals it. You're not here to sit on a throne. You're here to become a tuning fork in a house that's been out of pitch for far too long. You didn't come back for position. You came back to return people to themselves, to realign their names with the purpose they buried, to realign spaces with the presence they forgot. And that's why your steps feel weighty. Not because you're demanding attention, but because you're carrying design, blueprint, order, whispers from the wilderness, now finding their way into the walls. You don't need the mic. You are the frequency that resets the atmosphere just by being in tune with who you truly are. You came back to restore rhythm to a people moving fast, but going nowhere, to remind a tired house that speed is not alignment and visibility is not authority. You are not chasing leadership. You are walking embodiment of what it looks like when the soul leads again. So let them talk about power. You'll talk about placement, about purpose, about peace that hums like a string finally tightened just right. You didn't come back for power. You came back for alignment. And because of that, everything is starting to sound like heaven again. Episode 9. You're not just healing the room. You're reclaiming the land. You thought you were here to make people feel safe, to bring healing to hearts, to soften tension, to speak peace into the atmosphere. And yes, you've done that, but something deeper has begun to move beneath your feet. Something ancient, something buried, something waiting. You're not just healing the room. You're reclaiming the land, land that remembers, land that still holds echoes of what was stolen, what was silenced, what was suppressed, to protect the comfort of the powerful. You're not just walking into places. You're awakening them. Your steps are not light. They are legal. They carry the authority of someone who was sent to stand where others fell and lift what never should have been buried. This isn't just about peace. It's about possession, about claiming back spaces that were built on survival and calling them into belonging again. The floor recognizes you. The air shifts when you enter. Even the walls start remembering what it felt like to hold truth without trembling, because you're not just soothing pain. You're shaking thrones that were never meant to be sat on. This land knows your name, even if no one else in the room does. It remembers the voice of your ancestors, the songs they weren't allowed to sing, the prayers they whispered when hope was illegal. And now you returned, not loud, not angry, but rooted. And the land exhales. You're not here to decorate a space. You're here to dismantle desecration. You're not here to fit into the atmosphere. You're here to realign it with its original frequency, because land doesn't just hold history. It holds assignment. And when the right soul returns, with clean hands and holy fire, the territory knows the one we waited for has arrived. You're not just healing trauma. You are breaking treaties made in fear. You are not just comforting souls. You are calling soil back into covenant. This is deeper than revival. This is reclamation of memory, of meaning, of every sacred thing that was pushed underground when the world wasn't ready for the fullness of what lived here. You're not walking in like a guest. You're walking in like a keeper of the flame, the one who doesn't just feel the pain, but plants healing into the dirt and says, we start again, right here, right now, with heaven watching. You're not just healing the room. You're reclaiming the land, and nothing on this ground will ever feel the same again. Episode 10. Your return wasn't a full circle. It was a divine reset. They'll say, look at you full circle, as if you've come back to tie a neat ribbon on everything that broke you, as if returning means resolving, means settling, means softly landing back where it all began. But no, this is not a circle. This is a reset, and heaven is watching. You didn't come back to repeat. You came back to recode. You didn't come back to honor history. You came back to redeem it. You're not here to close the loop. You're here to break the loop, to sever the cycle, to burn the blueprint that was built in survival and replace it with a kingdom design. What happened here will not be buried. It will be rewritten. And you are holding the pen. They thought your return meant softness, meant silence, meant you'd fit better this time. But what they didn't know is that you returned with divine authority, with language that doesn't ask for permission, with presence that doesn't shrink to please memory. You didn't come back to revisit who you were. You came back to introduce who you become, a keeper of vision, a breaker of patterns, a voice that carries the exact frequency this land forgot it once knew. You're not finishing a story. You're resetting the page. This isn't closure. It's commission. This isn't a return. It's a recalibration of time itself. Because what broke you doesn't get the final word. What delayed you doesn't define your rhythm. And what wounded you doesn't get to decide how the future unfolds. You stand now as a reset point, and every step forward from here is a ripple. Every word you speak is a course correction. Every breath you take is proof that mercy didn't just restore you. It restructured the whole timeline through you. You didn't come back as a sequel. You came back as a new beginning, wearing the face of a survivor who now governs. This is not a return. This is a reinstallation of truth, and the ground beneath your feet knows it. The air knows it. Even the things that once resisted you, they feel the tremble now, not because you're loud, but because you're real and aligned and unstoppable. You are not repeating a cycle. You are resetting destiny, and everything behind you now bends to the new rhythm you've brought with your walk. So don't let them call this a circle. Let them call it what heaven already named it: a divine reset, a holy reroute, a shift in the story that started with silence and ends with glory.